Right now, let's turn our attention to what happened yesterday in Beirut, that extraordinary explosion, a blast which took out every window for 15 miles. It was heard 100 miles away in Cyprus. It's now believed, according to the Lebanese Red Cross, to have left 100 people dead, more than 4,000 injured from the blast, which in the Lebanese capital, a giant mushroom cloud and fireball, which I think you must have seen now on social media or on TV. Let's talk about that with Tom Tugendhat. He's chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee and a Conservative MP. Good morning to you, Tom.
Morning, Julia. Perhaps more importantly, I lived in Beirut for 2 years.
Did you? I didn't know that. That's extraordinary. I mean, again, we know Beirut has been ravaged for many years by bombs during civil wars and the like. And obviously, perhaps the people of Beirut perhaps are more psychologically prepared for this than many other places. But absolutely devastating explosion, absolutely damaged across the entire city. What were your thoughts when you saw that footage?
Well, it's heartbreaking. I mean, this is an area of the city that, when I was there in the late 90s, was in the process of being rebuilt after, as you'll remember, 20 years of civil war. So it was pretty wrecked. I mean, it was, pothole buildings and, and really damaged areas. But actually, it was being rebuilt. And so a lot of the... It was slightly odd. You'd get this extraordinarily beautiful sort of Beirut-style apartment block right next to a totally destroyed sort of 1970s carcass, and that area of land, Solidaire as it's called, was extraordinarily vibrant as well. There's an amazing number of bars and nightclubs in various of the bombed out buildings and underground and various places like that. And so it's, funnily enough, it's an area I spent a lot of time.
Yeah.
But it's but now to see it like this is heartbreaking, and to know that so many people have been injured is much worse.
Well, absolutely. I mean, some of the footage is extraordinary. I think there's one particular footage, a bit of footage from someone on a rooftop terrace, and they're looking at this bomb it's a fireball, and then this massive explosion, which appears to be a very, very long way away, and then suddenly the blast hits them. It's a devastation across the city. The fact that it wasn't just limited to a very small area, say 15 miles wide, all the windows blown out. We see the devastation. Reporters on the ground showing how devastating it has been. This giant mushroom cloud. Do we know yet what the cause was, though? Because initially, of course, there were the usual fears that it would be a bomb. Of course, the usual helpful characters immediately pointing the finger at Israel. That's been denied on all sides. Then the explanation of a fireworks storage, which seemed a little bit unlikely. Now we're told a highly explosive ammonium nitrate supply confiscated from a ship more than a year ago, stored in a warehouse at the port, might be responsible. But others in the military, former military people, are suggesting to me a thermobaric, I'm probably mispronouncing that, weapon of some sort. And this is the sort of bomb that has been used in the past by the United States, but has also been more recently used by Russian and Syrian forces during the Syrian civil war. But you've been in the military. What was your first take on it?
Well, my first take, I'm afraid, is it's too early to tell. And I'm not going to guess because, as you'll imagine, it is actually pretty easy normally to tell what has happened when you've had time to go down and have a look and find the pieces of debris and any evidence of chemicals. So let's just wait and see, because however this happened, I'm not saying whoever did this, because it may have been, it's possible that it was an accident, but however this happened, it is an extraordinary moment in Beirut's life, and something we need to get right, because we can't start pointing fingers at any local players, as it were, until we actually know what's going on. But it's hugely concerning, and if it is stuff stored in the port, as is possible, then there are huge failures of governance. If it's an attack, then there's real questions to be asked. But this is something we really do need to get absolutely right before we start pointing fingers.
And in terms of help for people of Beirut, we know that their health service already collapsing, as most around the world have been collapsing under the weight of the coronavirus, but also particularly the economic devastation they have seen because of the lockdown. The port, of course, a crucial part of their economy. They are already floundering. How much international help is there likely to be?
Well, I hope countries around the world will realise how important this is. I mean, Lebanon is currently holding the world's highest proportion of refugees. As I think I'm right in saying between a quarter and a half of its population is now Syrian migrants from the Syrian war, and that extraordinary generosity by the Lebanese people means that they are again even more under pressure despite, even further than the issues you're talking about there, Julia. And so helping people who are being already so generous, I think, is essential. And, some countries have in the past been very supportive, including, funnily enough, Saudi Arabia, Iran in some ways. There are actually countries that are traditionally not allies of ours who have been helpful. I mean, often at a price, but they have. And it's important that we too offer our support. Now, the UK has traditionally been very generous towards Lebanon as well, as has the United States. And I think this is one of those moments where we really do need to make sure we reach out and work with other countries that have really strong links, like France, to make sure that we're offering the support that they need.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Tom Tugendhat, Tory MP and Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, lived in Beirut for 2 years. Tom Slater is Deputy Editor of Spiked Online. He's still joining me this morning. Tom, we were talking a little bit earlier about what happened in Beirut, and so much of the TV news and social media last night and this morning dominated by that extraordinary explosion, the biggest peacetime explosion ever seen. It's thought some extraordinary footage now of Beirut online, just showing the widespread devastation. 100 people now known to have died, more than 4,000 injured from the blast, and every window, I think this is an extraordinary fact, every window for 15 miles blown out. We know, of course, that Beirut, look, we've been devastated by coronavirus and our economy devastated by the lockdown, but Beirut has faced far worse than we'll ever face, because they start from such a difficult place in the first place.
No, that country and that city have been going through so much in recent years. It was facing its worst economic crisis since its civil war, even before the coronavirus hit. You've also got the coronavirus to deal with. You've got ongoing protests in relation to the government, which is alleged to be incredibly corrupt, according to them. Even at the time, there was a case going through The Hague at the moment where, to do with the bombing and killing of their former Prime Minister in 2005, just gives you a little bit of a flavour for how much kind of turmoil has rocked that city and rocked that country. So this on top of it, which so many people on social media from Beirut were talking about, how this just particular blast paled in comparison to anything that they'd experienced beforehand.
Indeed.
I think gives you a little bit of a sense of what that country and what those people have been through.
Absolutely, Tom. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's cross live to Beirut now to Sky News' Alex Crawford, who's on the ground there. Good morning to you, Alex. Now, I know there's going to be a bit of delay on the line, a few problems with lines for obvious reasons. Tell us what you are seeing on the ground right now in Beirut.
I'm seeing a huge amount of pretty much unimaginable devastation. There's a lot of noise above me. That's at least 2 helicopters, one of which is still dropping huge big buckets of water over a fire that's still burning near the port. Literally, I'm at the crossroads of a big intersection, a road intersection, and everywhere there is devastation. There are cars with windows punched in, bonnets busted. There's trees brought down. There's whole buildings which have got not a single pane of glass still intact, and balconies have come down. People are trying to rescue bits of stock from devastated businesses. There is a huge big warehouse in front of me with all the boxes and stock inside that's been torn to shreds. Half the stock has been shredded. There are fleets of ambulances zipping up and down here, trying to find people who are believed to still be trapped. There's hundreds of troops in the city fanning out, trying to help whatever way they can. There's a fair amount of, I'd hesitate to say chaos, because there are loads of people who are just turning up and doing things for themselves, sweeping up and getting their businesses, turning up to find homes and flats and apartments, literally horrible. I mean, I walked into a house where a man, he hadn't been there. He'd just been away to get a haircut. His father was there. And there's blood splattered all over the walls where his elderly father managed to out somehow. And every single room was down, furniture on a half wall down over about 4 or 5 rooms. kitchen.
Extraordinary. Alex, the line is cutting out a little bit. I'm going to persevere for a few more moments and hope that we can hear. There's still a big question mark over the cause of this explosion. Immediate accusations and claims, of course, of bombs. That's all an attack from Israel. Immediately denied, not confirmed at all. Absolutely did not happen. There was talk about a firework supply, then a highly explosive ammonium nitrate supply confiscated from a ship a year ago, stored in warehouses at the port. There's some talk there may be some weapons, some explosives support there. Donald Trump in the last few hours has talked about a terrible attack and a bomb of some kind. What is the latest in Beirut about the cause of this massive explosion?
Well, officially, certainly the official lines are that possibly this was some... I mean, first of all, I think it's a bit too early. The initial official lines are that there was nearly 3,000 tons of ammonium nitrate, one of the most explosive and dangerous chemicals probably that you can imagine, that were all stored in one warehouse at the port. Apologies for that.
No, we can understand it, yes.
Ammonium nitrate is used as fertilizer, but also is an explosive agent. It doesn't even need oxygen and it's very difficult to put out. Hence why there's lots of helicopters desperately trying to put out this still burning fire. Now, there are immediate questions why this confiscated cargo was left for 6 years. This extremely toxic, dangerous chemical was left sitting at the port. The port, which is the gateway to 90% of the imports that Lebanon relies on. This is a country that has been devastated over the years, has had huge protests over the past year. Its economy was on its knees before, plus it was coping with a global pandemic and a creaking medical infrastructure. It has literally, metaphorically and physically flattened the city. Miles and miles around. You literally can't go into a street which is not affected. So
these are extraordinary scenes. Alex Crawford, we'll have to leave it there. Well, let's talk to Rear Admiral Dr. Chris Parry. He's a former NATO commander and joins us now. Good morning to you.
Morning, Julia.
Lovely to speak to you. Now, the initial reaction, of course, given that part of the world, was, of course, that it was some sort of a bomb attack. Israel, fingers pointed almost immediately. It's been made very clear by the Lebanese authorities that it wasn't Israel. Israel, of course, denied anything, indeed offered aid to Beirut. And then there was talk about a fireworks supply going off, which all seemed rather unlikely. Latest is this highly explosive ammonium nitrate, apparently confiscated from a ship a year ago and stored in the warehouse. But does that explain things for you, as someone who has been in the field of war for many years?
Well, yes. In fact, I was in Lebanon in the 1980s. I think it's fair to say that nothing is ever as it seems in Beirut or in Lebanon in general. So until we get more concrete information, we can't be definite. But there's a whole range of possibilities. There's no doubt that ammonium nitrate, when stored, is very dangerous indeed. Somebody's talking about 2,000 tons of it in one place, which just seems a bit marginal in terms of decision making. But
that's military speak for that's an insane choice. Is that right?
Absolutely.
What is ammonium nitrate? What does it do, other than, if this is the case, explode?
Yeah, it's ammonium nitrate. I mean, you can actually make it out of common fertilizer and things like that, which is why fertilizer, of course, is a key sort of guide that somebody might be up to something. So it is actually a constituent of fairly concentrated explosives. So you have to be really careful where you put it, and certainly not in that sort of bulk. What's really interesting is what you might call the pathology of the explosion, because if you look closely, you can see all sorts of things popping off in the early stages around the early exposure. And that suggests not ammonium nitrate, but something else. And I just wonder if something else was stored there weapons, ammunition, something like that. And the shockwave is quite extraordinary. I mean, that is up at what we would call thermobaric proportions, where the oxygen gets sucked in and obviously ignites and gives you a very powerful explosion indeed. So I just wonder if there was something else in that warehouse apart from ammonium nitrate.
So, and there are explosive and weapons and bombs that have been developed which deliberately do that, and they've been used by the US previously in the Middle East. But we know also more recently they're believed to have been used by the Russians and the Syrians during the Syrian civil war.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And so I think just wait and see how this plays out, because I think there's a whole load of possibilities here. Of course, everybody's pointing the finger in various directions. Whether it's a conspiracy or it's a mess up by somebody, nobody knows yet. But as I said, not everything is as it seems in Beirut normally, in my experience.
Dr. Chris Parry, really appreciate you joining us there. Thank you for that. Tom Slater, Deputy Editor of Spike Online, listening to that. Interesting to hear that explanation. It's interesting. I've heard so many bomb disposal experts in the media in the last 12, 14 hours, all of them saying they've never seen anything like it, that it doesn't correspond with any obvious type of weapon that they can think of. So there are a lot of question marks. We've been told we're going to get answers in the next 48 hours. Of course, that doesn't help the 100 dead, that death toll rising constantly, and more than 4,000 injured from the blast.
No, completely. And I think it was interesting how quickly the story coming from official sources, or the story that was kind of leaking out, changed overnight. As you say, there was this original discussion around fireworks, which stretched credibility on the face of it, through to this admission from officials themselves about there being this big stockpile of this fertiliser come explosives. And I think what's going to be really tricky and what's worth bearing in mind from the outside is the fact that the government and officialdom there is very distrusted at the moment anyway, and by the people who've been, there's been huge street protests on the streets of Beirut in recent months. So it will be out to see if we get to the bottom of it, and if so, how quickly.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed. Many properties destroyed around the entire city, including the home of my next guest, Richard Spencer. He's the Middle Eastern correspondent for The Times. And Richard, you were among the many, many tens of thousands who saw your home destroyed by the explosion. Just tell us what happened to you.
Well, I was sitting at my desk at about 6 o'clock last night. I was just literally pressing send on some copy that I was sending back to the Times, and there was a massive sound outside. There was a kind of it was like an explosion. It wasn't quite like an explosion, and so I stood up to look out the window, and then there was another explosion.
Richard, can I just stop you there? There's quite a lot of noise, I think, whether the phone being moved or you're in the wind or not, but we could just try and cut down on that background noise. It'd be very helpful.
I'm right. I'm actually, you caught me just as I'm standing by the scene, by the port now, right, which is where the explosion was. So, yeah, I'm afraid you're just hearing the emergency vehicles and the police vehicles and all the traffic as well going past. Yeah. So I don't think there's much I can do. No,
of course. No, I think it might be the wind from the port. But so you heard this explosion, but it didn't sound like an explosion. And are you very close to the port, or were you one of the many homes miles and miles away that was affected?
Yeah, I'm about 3/4 of a mile away. But the thing is, the geography of Beirut makes this an extraordinary incident, because from the port, the hills rise up straight into the city. So I'm only 3/4 of a mile away, but my flat looks right down over the port. I can see the port from my flat, and that's true for half the city. Sort of, it's like a bowl around the seafront and the port, and we were just completely taken out. I mean, it's an enormous explosion. I was thrown right across my room by the blast wave, and that was true for many, many of my friends. Some have injuries. I came out and streets were flooding with people with blood coming down their faces from flying glass, as well as, of course, many people much more seriously injured. And as we know now, scores of people dead.
Yeah, indeed. And do we know yet what the cause of that explosion was? There was obviously an immediate thought that it might be a bomb attack. Even Donald Trump this morning, overnight, has been talking about a terrible attack, a bomb of some kind. But I believe that seems to be dispelled. Certainly Israel has said nothing to do with them. But there was some talk about a fireworks storage facility, which seemed pretty unlikely. What's the latest explanation?
Well, what we certainly know, I think we're fairly confident now that the main blast, the extraordinary sort of mushroom cloud that people maybe have seen the videos of, was caused by ammonium nitrate, which is, that chemical that's used both in fertilizer and bombs, homemade bombs. And the government have said that 2,700 tons of this stuff was being stored in a warehouse at the port, having been impounded several years ago. And that was somehow let off. And it appears that the first explosion, which is the thing that people are saying maybe that was fireworks, because on videos it looks like sort of fireworks, but maybe the first explosion set off the ammonium nitrate. But what we don't know is what the first explosion was. Fireworks seems a bit unlikely.
Yeah, it does certainly, doesn't it? And we've been speaking to some military experts who seem to think that that it's rather unlikely that this wasn't some sort of explosive, which everyone would have known was an explosive. Do you think we're likely to get an open and honest explanation from the authorities in Beirut?
Well, I think the explanation for the main explosion is now. I see no reason to doubt their account. I'm not an expert on explosives, but if you have 2,700 tons, as they say, of ammonium nitrate, if that explodes, that's what you're going to see. I mean, for comparison, I don't know if you remember the Oklahoma bombing 25 or so years ago. That was caused by 2 tons of ammonium nitrate, and that was a pretty heavy bomb. So you're talking about something that's 1,500 times the scale of that. In terms of what set it off, that's another question, and that's going to be much harder to determine, I think, for all of us.
Absolutely. Well, can I just point out that it's extraordinary that despite the fact that your home had just been blown up and you've been in that explosion, you still got a front page story on the Times newspaper this morning about being blasted across your room, your flat smashed. Tells us what a pro you are. Thank you so much for joining us. Glad you're safe. Richard Spencer, Middle East correspondent for The Times.